Hello everyone, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himbar, and today I'm doing another fantasy essay video. This one is probably going to be really short. As this is an essay, it's really a lecture given by Kurt Vonnegut in 2004. I will link it below. There's at least, it seems like it was part of a presentation. Anyways, this lecture though is called The Shape of Stories. Kurt Vonnegut is of course a famous author. I've seen him thrown in with postmodernist authors. I would imagine his most famous book is probably Slaughterhouse-Five. I've never read anything by Vonnegut. I do plan on changing that at some point, but I mean, I think he's known for like gallows humor and satire and just stuff like that. And I would say this 17-minute presentation is very, very funny. It is just full of jokes, honestly, and it made me laugh out loud a few times. And the whole crowd was laughing a lot too. So, which, you know, of course, but people like funny guys. So, and so it's pretty interesting. He said he's, at the beginning of this anyways, he says he's trying to bring scientific thinking to literary criticism, and of course he says no one appreciates it, but he basically has this graph that has, I mean, like, it's a graph that has a line here and a graph that has a line here, basically, let's put it that way, and so he's saying most stories start above the horizontal axis, because he says people that can't afford books and like to read books don't like reading about poor or sick people. And so this up here, basically, this y-axis, where you are on it, like if you're, I guess if you're above the x, I could totally, math is I'm terrible at math. If you're above this horizontal axis, basically, you're well off, and if you're below it, you're in a pretty poor place, I suppose. And so he's basically saying that most people start above that horizontal axis, higher up on that y-axis, right? And so he gives examples, right? So he says, like, someone gets into trouble, right? And then when they get out, they go higher than where they started. And then this x-axis is basically the time, right? The time through the story, essentially. And so then he says, like, another one is someone who starts a little lower than the first one, starts off as a day like any other day and then becomes perfectly wonderful is what he says. So they go up high and then it's not, and then they go down low, and then of course when they get it back again, so it goes back up. So he didn't give an example of like these first stories. And then he said one says that there's one that starts low below this x-axis, so, and it's like their mothers died, their father is immediately married, this not very nice woman who's got, you know, daughters, and yeah, it's obviously Cinderella, right? So he's doing that essentially. And then he does one that starts way low, and it goes just way lower, and that's the metamorphosis, which I don't think he actually calls it by name, but he does say it's by, Kafka. Franz, I think, is it Frank? I don't remember. Kafka. Anyways, I'm beating myself up because I can't remember for some reason. But the Metamorphosis is about a story about a guy who kind of like hates his like work life, and then he turns into a cockroach. So like that's it's kind of a dumb story. Anyways, that's a famous one though, you know, for reasons. Anyways, and so then he briefly mentions that he studied anthropology, I think at the University of Chicago, he says, which was cool because I did study that too as well for a little while. I don't have an anthropology degree though. And he mentions how primitive stories are always dumb because they just follow the x-axis, basically. They don't go up or down, they just stay straight, right? Like it says a story about like getting to a river and then they saw like a raccoon or something, and it doesn't tell you what's good and what is bad, basically. And so he says, essentially, how is Hamlet, right? So he says those primitives are bad storytellers, but then he says, what about Hamlet, though? Because Hamlet, he says, essentially, once you go through the points of Hamlet, it doesn't move either, you know? Or they're not told exactly, they don't know enough, basically, is what he's saying. The reader doesn't know enough. Well, in the case of Hamlet, I guess it'd be the person in the audience doesn't know enough to know whether it's good or bad, right? And it's just echoing other people's reactions. And so the story is actually a straight line as well, just like these primitive stories, which is why he's saying that Shakespeare is actually a good storyteller, because even though it stays the same, you're still entertained, essentially. And so then he basically poses some questions. He says, do humans notice when they are happy? And so it's pretty interesting. He mentions, I think, his uncle, and just realizing when things are nice, if, do people do people stop and realize, oh, this is nice, you know what I mean? And I'm, this is a nice place we're in, or I'm having a nice time, and he does this all while being very funny, right? So I'm just summarizing it for you. I'm going to keep this really, really short. You can just go and watch this idea about how the shape of stories, right? And maybe think about some questions that Vonnegut asks, basically, the audience. And so that's you as well. So anyways, this has been Liam with Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.